The hammer slipped from my trembling hands and crashed onto the concrete floor, echoing through our basement like a gunshot. I wasn't supposed to be down here fixing the broken water pipe, but Michael was away on another one of his mysterious business trips, and the ceiling above had been dripping for 3 days straight, making that maddening tap 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 that was driving me insane. The loose brick behind the old furnace caught my eye only because my flashlight beam hit it at just the wrong angle, revealing a dark hollow space that shouldn't exist in our perfect suburban house. What I pulled out of that hidden cavity made my knees buckle and my world collapse in a single heartbeat. 47 wedding ring, each one carefully wrapped in delicate tissue paper, each one bearing an engraving with a woman's name and a date going back 23 years. Sarah 2001, Linda 2003, Jennifer 2005, Maria 2008, and the list went on, and Michael's precise handwriting on tiny labels attached to each ring. My own engagement ring suddenly felt like a noose around my finger as I realized the horrible truth staring me in the face. I was number 48, the man I'd been married to for 6 months, the man who brought me coffee in bed every morning, the man who kissed my forehead and called me his angel, wasn't just my husband. He was a collector. And I was his latest prize. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael saying he'd be home early tonight with a surprise for our 6-month anniversary, and suddenly every romantic gesture, every sweet word, every gentle touch felt like the careful preparation of a predator. If you're watching this story and feeling that chill run down your spine, hit that like button, because what I discovered next was even more terrifying. The rings weren't just trophies, they were evidence, and the small notebook hidden beneath them contained addresses, phone numbers, and detailed notes about each woman's daily routine, their family members, their fears, and their dreams that had all been cut short. I sat on that cold basement floor holding the evidence of 47 lives that had intersected with the man sleeping in my bed, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was running out of time. The sound of his car pulling into our driveway sent ice through my veins as I quickly shoved everything back into the hiding place and ran upstairs to pretend I was the loving wife he expected to find. But as Michael walked through that door with roses in his hand and that charming smile that had won my heart, I couldn't help but wonder which one of those 47 women had received the exact same flowers on their last day alive. Sleep was impossible that night as I lay next to a man who might have killed 47 women, but I had to act normal, had to smile when he kissed me good morning, had to pretend my world hadn't shattered into a million pieces. The moment Michael left for work, I was back in that basement with shaking hands and a racing heart, pulling out that terrible collection once again. This time I photographed everything: the rings, the notebook, the dates, and most importantly the names. Sarah Martinez from Phoenix, Linda Chen from Seattle, Jennifer Rodriguez from Miami, each name representing a life, a family, a future that had been stolen. I started with Sarah since she was the first victim from 2001, and what I found online made my blood run cold. A missing person report that was never solved, a family who had been searching for answers for over 20 years, a mother who still posted on social media every year on Sarah's birthday begging for any information about her daughter's disappearance. Linda Chen's case was the same story, a bright young nurse who had vanished without a trace in 2003, leaving behind a sister who had never stopped looking for her. Jennifer Rodriguez had been a teacher, a beloved member of her community who had simply disappeared one day after telling her friends about the wonderful new man she was dating. The pattern was always the same: young professional women between 25 and 30 with no close family nearby, women who wouldn't be immediately missed when they vanished. Women like me. I realized with growing horror that Michael had been perfecting his technique for over 2 decades, choosing victims who fit a specific profile, women who were lonely enough to fall for his charm but isolated enough that their disappearance wouldn't trigger immediate investigation. The notebook revealed his twisted methodology: how he would court each woman for exactly 6 months, building trust and dependency before making his move. 6 months. Our anniversary was tomorrow. Comment below if you think I should have called the police right then, because what I did next changed everything. Instead of running to the authorities, I made a decision that still haunts me. I decided to dig deeper to find proof that would stick, because I knew that without concrete evidence, Michael's wealth and charm would get him out of any accusation. I spent the entire day calling families, pretending to be a journalist working on a story about missing persons, and with each conversation my heart broke a little more. Sarah's mother cried when I mentioned her daughter's name, telling me how Sarah had been so excited about her new relationship, how she'd talked about finally finding the one. Linda's sister described the expensive gifts that had started arriving at Linda's apartment in the weeks before she vanished, gifts from a mysterious boyfriend no one had ever met. Jennifer's best friend remembered how Jennifer had shown her photos of a handsome older man who swept her off her feet with romantic gestures and promises of a perfect future. Every story was my story, every victim had lived my exact experience, and I realized that Michael hadn't just been collecting rings. He had been perfecting murder. As the sun set and I heard his car in the driveway again, I made a choice that would either save my life or end it. I was going to confront him. Michael walked through the door that evening carrying a small velvet box and wearing the same smile that had made me fall in love with him 6 months ago. "Happy anniversary, darling," he said, setting the box on our dining room table. "I have something very special planned for tonight." I stared at that box knowing it probably contained another piece of jewelry, another token of his twisted affection, and felt my courage building like a storm. "Actually, Michael, I have something special too," I said, walking to the basement door, "something I found while you were away." The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable, the warmth draining from his eyes like water from a broken dam. "What did you find, Jessica?" he asked, and his voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, cold and dangerous. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken of the rings, watching as his mask finally slipped completely away. 47 women, Michael," I whispered. 47 lives you stole, 47 families you destroyed, and you thought I would be number 48. The man standing in front of me was no longer the loving husband who brought me coffee in bed. This was a predator who had been caught and was calculating his next move. "You don't understand," he said, stepping closer. "Those women, they were broken, they were lost. I gave them purpose, I gave them love. You gave them death," I shot back, clutching my phone tighter, "and you were planning to do the same to me." Michael laughed then, and the sound made my skin crawl because it wasn't the laugh of the man I married, it was something cold and empty. "Planning, Jessica, I still am." He moved faster than I expected, lunging for my phone, but I was ready and bolted for the front door, screaming at the top of my lungs, hoping our neighbors would hear. But Michael caught me at the threshold, his hand wrapping around my wrist with bruising force as he dragged me back inside. "You should have minded your own business," he hissed. "Now you're going to join your sisters much sooner than I planned. Like this video if you believe in fighting back, because what happened next was the battle of my life." I remembered the self-defense classes my sister had made me take before I moved to the city, and I used every technique I could recall, driving my elbow into his ribs and stomping on his foot with all my strength. Michael cursed and loosened his grip just enough for me to break free, and this time I didn't run for the door, I ran for the kitchen and the knife block on the counter. "Stay away from me," I screamed, holding the biggest knife I could find. "I've already sent those photos to the police, to my family, to everyone." It was a lie, but it worked. Michael stopped advancing, his mind clearly racing as he calculated whether I was bluffing. "You're smarter than the others," he admitted, "but not smart enough, because there's no evidence linking me to any of those disappearances, just some rings that could belong to anyone." "What about the notebook, Michael?" I said. "The one with all their addresses, their routines, their fears written in your handwriting." His face went pale. "What about the life insurance policies you took out on each of them?" I continued, making up details, but watching his reaction tell me I was hitting close to the truth. "What about the rental cars, the fake IDs, the bank accounts?" "You don't know anything," he snarled, but I could see the panic in his eyes. "I know enough," I said, backing toward the door, "and by tomorrow morning everyone else will too." That's when Michael made his final mistake. He turned and ran, not toward me but toward the basement, probably to destroy evidence, and in that moment I knew I had him. But I also knew this was far from over. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life as I sat in a police station telling my story over and over to detectives who seemed more interested in why I hadn't called them immediately than in the evidence I'd uncovered. "Mrs. Patterson, you're asking us to believe your husband is a serial killer based on some old jewelry and your own investigation," Detective Williams said for the 10th time. "We need more than speculation." Michael had disappeared the night of our confrontation, vanishing like smoke, just as he had taught 47 women to do, but in reverse. The rings were gone, the notebook was gone, and without his body or concrete evidence linking him to the disappearances, my story sounded like the paranoid delusions of an unstable wife. "I'm telling you," he admitted it, I pleaded. "He was going to kill me just like he killed all those other women." But Michael was smarter than I'd given him credit for. Within days his lawyer appeared with evidence that painted me as the unstable party in our relationship. Medical records showing I'd been prescribed anxiety medication. Text messages I'd sent to friends expressing doubts about our quick engagement. Security footage from our home showing me in the basement with the rings trying to make it look like I'd planted them there. Michael had been planning for this possibility maybe for years, creating a narrative where any wife who discovered his secret would look like a jealous, paranoid woman trying to destroy her husband's reputation. The worst part was that it was working. "We've spoken with Mr. Patterson," Detective Williams told me a week later. "He's agreed to come in for questioning, but frankly, Mrs. Patterson, your story has more holes than Swiss cheese." I wanted to scream that of course it had holes. I'd been married to a master manipulator who'd had 23 years to perfect his methods. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear how this story ends, because what happened when Michael finally faced the police was not what anyone expected. 2 weeks after my confrontation, Michael walked into that police station wearing an expensive suit and accompanied by the best defense attorney money could buy. He sat across from the detectives with the same calm confidence he'd shown me every morning over coffee and proceeded to destroy my credibility piece by piece. "Officers, my wife has been struggling with mental health issues since our wedding," he said with just the right amount of concern in his voice. "The stress of our new marriage, the pressure she puts on herself to be perfect, it's been affecting her judgment." He had medical documentation. He had testimony from neighbors who'd seen me acting strangely. He had explanations for everything. The rings were antiques he'd been collecting for years, planning to surprise me with a jewelry business we could run together. The notebook was his inventory system, tracking where he'd purchased each piece and their estimated values. The missing women weren't connected to him at all, and any similarities in their disappearances were just coincidence. "My husband is lying," I told the detectives, but even I could hear how desperate I sounded. "Please, you have to believe me, those women are dead and he killed them." But Michael had one more card to play, one that completely destroyed any credibility I had left. He showed them the divorce papers he'd been secretly preparing, citing my erratic behavior and mental instability as grounds for ending our marriage. "I love my wife," he said with tears in his eyes, "but I can't live with someone who's trying to destroy me with these wild accusations. I think she needs professional help." The detectives believed him. Why wouldn't they believe the successful businessman with the perfect reputation over the hysterical wife who'd broken into her own basement and photographed her husband's legitimate antique collection? I walked out of that police station knowing that Michael had won. But I also walked out knowing something he didn't expect. I wasn't going to give up. 5 years have passed since that terrible night in my basement, and I'm recording this story from a small apartment 3 states away from the house where I almost became victim number 48. Michael got everything in the divorce: the house, the money, the reputation, while I got nothing but the truth that no one wanted to believe. But the truth has a way of surfacing even when buried deep. 3 months ago I got a call from Detective Sarah Chen, yes, the sister of Linda Chen, victim number 2, and now a detective herself who had never stopped investigating her sister's disappearance. "Mrs. Patterson, I think you were right," she said, and those 5 words changed everything. "We found something. A storage unit registered under one of Michael's fake names containing items that belonged to the missing women. Personal belongings, photographs, clothing, things that proved beyond doubt that Michael had encountered these women before they vanished. We've reopened all the cases," Detective Chen told me, "and we've found evidence linking your ex-husband to at least 12 of the disappearances. 12 out of 47. It wasn't enough, but it was a start." Michael was arrested last month at his new home in California, where he'd been living under a different name with a new wife, a young teacher named Emma, who fit his victim profile perfectly. The media called him the anniversary killer because of his 6-month pattern, and suddenly everyone wanted to interview the wife who had escaped. But as I sit here today watching the news coverage of his trial, I can't help but feel that justice is still incomplete. Michael's lawyers are arguing that the evidence is circumstantial, that there's no proof he actually killed anyone, that the missing women could have simply chosen to disappear on their own. The storage unit evidence might get him convicted for theft or fraud, but murder without bodies is almost impossible to prove. And even if he goes to prison, there are still 35 families who may never know what happened to their daughters, sisters, mothers. 35 women whose stories may never be told, whose bodies may never be found, whose killers may never fully pay for what he did. If you believe that some stories don't have happy endings, hit that subscribe button, because this case is still ongoing and the fight for justice continues every single day. Michael's trial starts next month and Detective Chen has asked me to testify about what I found in our basement about the confrontation about the pattern I discovered. I'll be facing the man who almost killed me across a courtroom where his lawyers will try to paint me as crazy again, where they'll argue that I'm an unreliable witness whose testimony should be ignored. But I'll be there speaking for Sarah and Linda and Jennifer and Maria and all the others whose voices were silenced. Speaking for Emma, his new wife who escaped because of what I discovered. Speaking for all the women who might have been victims 49, 50, 60 and beyond. The truth is that monsters like Michael don't get the justice they deserve. They get lawyers and technicalities and reasonable doubt. They get to live while their victims remain forever missing. But sometimes the best we can do is stop them from creating more victims. Sometimes survival itself is a victory even when justice sleeps. And sometimes the most important story isn't the one with the perfect ending. It's the one that warns others about the danger that's still out there waiting behind a charming smile and a romantic gesture. Because Michael Patterson may go to prison, but there are others like him. Men who collect women like trophies, who perfect their hunting techniques over decades, who hide behind respectability while leaving families destroyed in their wake. This story doesn't end with his arrest. It ends with a warning. Trust your instincts. Question perfection. And if you ever find yourself in a basement surrounded by evidence of unspeakable evil, run. Because sometimes the person you love most in the world is the one who's planning to make you disappear. Comment below if you think Michael will finally face justice for his crimes, and remember that justice delayed is not always justice denied. But sometimes it's justice that may never come at all. And that's the most terrifying truth of all.